Today I am going to explain I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou is a powerful feminist writer of Afro-American ethnicity. She is widely acclaimed author, poet, and civil rights activist who also worked with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Maya Angelou had an extremely traumatic childhood. Actually, some people say that she was exploited by her own father. But we do not have any proper authenticity about that. But it so happened that she had lost her voice. She was under traumatic condition and she could not speak at all. And her poem, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, was written in 1969 and it tells about her life up to the age of 17. In this poem, it brought an international acclaim and recognition, but it also tells about how she was doubly marginalized on the basis of her race and gender. It was basically her teacher Bertha Flowers, who helped her to come out of the trauma, and it is a process of her recovery from this trauma that she could write a poetry. The bird in the cage is symbol of African Americans and their fight for freedom. It symbolizes the struggle of being a black author whose words were not heard and of one that longs for freedom. Think of the lines, grave of dreams, nightmares scream, and compare the liberty of a free bird with that of the shackled caged one. Poetry played an important part in the recovery of her voice, which in turn signaled the success of her healing process. She was inspired by Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem Sympathy. And this poem basically shows a contrast between the fight of a bird that is free with that of the caged bird whose wings are clipped by projecting their respective images. It has an illusion. It has the reference to other works and basically Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem Sympathy, which was written in 1899 and was published in Lyrics of the Hearthside. Now, when I start with this poem, first of all, we need to understand the scenario that all the Africans who were actually being colonized by the Americans, as we had read in the first chapter of the Chief Seattle's speech, the same was the scenario that they did not have any right, they did not have the freedom. And here, this girl who's actually wanting to express herself is not able to do so. The poem metaphorically alludes to the differences between the whites and African Americans during the civil rights era. The first stanza says, a free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. A free bird, that is the American citizens who were given all the rights, who all had all the basic facilities given to them. They can leap, they can soar, they can go to any height of the sky. And it seems as if when they are taking the flight, the wind is also favoring them. It is at the back of the wind that the wings are soaring high. They are floating downstream. Now when the boat goes downstream, it is in the direction of the wind. So here everything is favoring the Americans. And underline that line, back of the leaps on the back of the wind. That is personification. A caged bird is leaping on the back of the wind. and floats downstream. Again, we have the same extended imagery, and it is also known as kinesthetic imagery. KINESTHETIC, kinesthetic imagery, that it is moving in the direction of the wind till the current ends and dips his wing. Now, just imagine a sunset time. During the sunset time, usually the sky is of purple and orangish color. Now, this is the orangish color, and the bird is soaring high in that, and it seems as if it has spread its wing and claims that the whole orange sky is hers. But here, when we talk of the bird, we usually associate it with the feminine gender. But Maya has written it as a masculine gender, and it claims the bird his. So, if you do not want to make it a gender, feminine or masculine, it's okay. You can write it just the bird. Whether it be feminine or masculine or whatever, we are just talking about a free bird, that a free bird can soar to any height and claim the entire sky to be its own. It is the confidence of the freedom of the whites which is being projected in these lines. Now, just see, dips his wing in the orange sun rays. There is a symbolism, there is a glow of happiness. And in the last four lines, that is, and the current ends, dips his wing in the orange sun rays till dares to claim the sky, we have a visual imagery. We can imagine that the big bird is flying high and has spread its wing, and it's claiming the whole sky as its own. It was the habit of Americans to colonize the native people and take their property as their own. So here also the bird is claiming the entire sky. In the second stanza, we are talking about the caged bird. But a bird that stacks down his narrow cage can seldom see through the bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. Now just imagine a bird in a cage. Now this is a symbolic cage, that is the denial of their expression. They are not given the freedom to express themselves. They cannot say something. They cannot even react, retaliate the torture they are facing. They cannot rebel. They cannot rage a war. So here the bird that is stacked in a narrow cage. It could also be the situation of the personal situation of Maya Angelou, where she is exploited and she cannot express. She has lost her voice. So that is a sort of a cage. She wants to express, she cannot because she has already lost her voice. So she feels herself as if she has been clapped into some cage. She is in some shackles, can seldom see through her bars of rage. Now she is angry in herself. She wants to express. She is under a traumatic condition but cannot express. Now bars of rage is something which has been a sort of a liking of the examiners. They often ask us, why is it said that she can seldom see through the bars of rage? Now just imagine if it is a cage. There would be certainly some bars. The bars would also stop her vision, and she can see only through the gaps. Now these gaps are actually being dominated by her own anger. Even if she wants to see something nice apart from what has happened to her, she's always in her anger. She's not able to express. That is also a sort of a furiousness at her own helplessness. It is not only the anger on the torturer, it is the anger on her own helplessness. Her wings are clipped. She has got no right. She has got no expression. Her wings are clipped. Clipped means tied up tightly. And the feet are tied. Now, not only the wings, that is the little bit of freedom which she can experience, she's not able to. She's not getting that. And her feet are tied. Now, you can even say that it is all a symbolism. We have a sort of a visual imagery, and the bird has been personified. That she is in the cage, she is clipped, she is barred. But if you do not want to make it a personification, you have to mention that there is a symbolism in it and we have an imagery. It is a visual imagery that you can visualize a bird in the cage. Then just see this line. Can seldom see through his bars of rage. There we have a symbolism of her helplessness. And then we say, his wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So he opens his throat to sing. There we have kinesthetic imagery in being clipped. That is all, both the wings are clipped tightly together, and even if she flutters badly, she would bleed, she would plead, but she wouldn't be able to free herself. So there we have a sort of a torment to free herself, but she is not able to. There is an action which is not being completed. So we have kinesthetic imagery there. Her feet are tied and she opens her throat to sing. Now she cannot come out herself. She cannot express herself. Her wings can flutter, but they cannot help her to fly out. Her feet are also not able to make her soar. So what is the only thing which she can let go out of the cage is only her voice. So she raises her voice, and from where does the voice come? Throat. So she starts singing. That if she starts singing, her voice would be heard somewhere outside the prison. It is only the voice which cannot be prisoned and put into the cage. So she sings loudly and she lets her voice go out. When the voice go out, it becomes an auditory imagery. Now just write that when we write about the bars of rage, it is symbolism. When we talk of the wings which are clipped and the feet which are tied, it is kinesthetic imagery. But when she opens her throat to sing, it becomes auditory imagery. Now, it is also in contrast with the previous one. When we were talking of the free bird, we had the visual imagery, it was soaring in the sky, it was daring to claim the sky. Now when the free bird was daring to climb the sky, we had an exaggeration. No bird can claim the entire sky. It will be able to claim only that much area as far as the spread of her wings. But here, even the cage is narrowed one. We do not have a hyperbole here, but a total contrast of the free bird and the caged bird. The free bird can claim the sky. It has got that much of freedom. And the caged bird is just confined to the small cage where it cannot even flutter its wing, it cannot even move its feet, it cannot come out, and whatever it sees is also barred by the anger. Her vision is also barred. The only thing that can claim the freedom in the cage is her voice, and so she sings loudly. In the third stanza, she says, the caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Now, just imagine somebody who has been in the captivity for quite a long time. If the person is brought out or is given a little bit of freedom, he won't be able to speak up blah 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 all of a sudden. It will take some time. He will be able to come to his senses. He would take time to come in terms with the reality, to associate with the reality and the circumstances that is he really free? It is a doubtful stage. Now here also the bird is not free. It is only her voice which it is letting out. So the bird is in a doubtful situation whether her voice would be heard outside or not, whether her voice also will be going out, or will that voice also be captivated. So it sings in a very fearful sound. It is an unsteady sound. It is because of the fear. It is because of the Americans that they might again put him to torture. There can be reference of some unknown freedom because it does not know what the freedom is. The bird has never seen the freedom. It does not know what is the freedom. But it longs for it still because it is a sort of a, what I should say, instinct. It is a basic instinct of every creature that they want to be free. Nobody wants the captivity. The bird has not seen freedom, but it knows in the situation it is in is certainly wrong. It is not a pleasant one. It knows what a pleasure would be if it is somewhere out. So it is something that is longed for still. And his tune is heard on distant hill. Then it claims that maybe if it sings, it raises its voice, it lets his voice go out of the cage, it might be heard by somewhere unknown, maybe on a distant hill, maybe somewhere far off, his voice would be heard. For the cage bird sings of freedom, and then she is singing of the freedom. The cage bird condition is so distressful that the cage becomes a symbol of grave dream. Now, it can also be associated with another poem, Slave's Dream. Slave's Dream. I think I had mentioned it earlier also many times when I had been teaching you. In the Slave's Dream, there is a story of a Niger king, Nigerian king, who was captured by the other people and made a slave. Now, when he was made a slave, he was cutting the crop in a rice field which was somewhere near to the sandy beach. And when he was cutting the crops, his sweat had all the sand grains attached on his body. At that time, the slaves were tortured to that extent that they were not given soaps to bath, they were not allowed to comb their hair, they were not given proper clothes to wear. Now, in the sunny time, this slave was cutting the crop. He was very tired. He may not have eaten for many days. He was starved. He was bare chest. He was working in the sun, and his hair were all matted with sand. And he was continuously yearning to be free, to go back to his queen, to go back to his children. And there are many symbolism and imagery about all that when he imagines that he is going back to his wife and he falls asleep. In his sleep, he dreams of his kingly days, his queen, his children, and his fields, how he was acclaimed by others when he had conquered the wars and all that. And during that time, also, the tears start rolling from his eyes. Even when in his dream he is claiming all that kingly pleasure, at that time also his mental torture is to that extent that he remembers he is a slave in reality. And he starts crying. His tears roll down and they get mixed up with the sand. And in that poem we are told that he dies. So what is basically being told to us is that a slave cannot even dream of freedom. He is so tormented that even his dreams bring him back to the reality that he is in captivity, he is being tortured, he has got no freedom to acclaim. Here also the bird's situation is distressful. And it is the grave's dream. Even if it lives a harsh life, it continues to persevere, and is willing to surrender to its opponent. Now the bird is also almost surrendering. The bird still longs for freedom, and in its song, that is towards the end of the poem, it just has a positive note that maybe my voice will be heard by someone somewhere in the distant hill. Now, this cage bird also has a reference to another poem written by Henry Louis Thoreau, To India, My Native Land. In this native land, when he talks of India, he talks of that India which was subjugated by the Britishers. Initially, India was known as the golden bird, and you can compare that bird to an eagle, which is very big, which has huge wings. And this golden bird was subjugated by the Britishers, and you can imagine that bird to be chained and brought down to the cage. Now, if the bird is in the cages and her wings are all tied and shackled in chains, what will happen? The bird will flutter, the wings will be dashing on the soil, and the soil will be flying and settling down on the wings. So we are using that imagery here with the caged bird as well. So I'm quoting the lines from Thoreau's poem in which he says, "Where is that glory, that reverence now? Thy eagle pinion is chained down at last, and crawling in the lowly dust art thou. Thy minstrel hath no wreath to weave for thee, save the sad story of thy misery." Now, the same imagery has been used by Maya Angelou also when she says that the caged bird is struggling to free herself but is finding herself helpless. Her wings are clipped, her feet are tied, and she is not able to free herself from any cage or captivity. Then what does she do? She raises her voice. That her voice cannot be prison, so she sings a song which could be heard even outside the prison, outside the captivity, and maybe in some distant hill someone would hear her and bring the freedom to her. In the next stanza, we contrast that caged bird to the free bird. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and trade winds, soft though the sighing freeze, and the fat worms waiting in the dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. Now just see, the free bird thinks of another breeze. The caged bird is not able to even flutter its wing. It is not able to come out of the captivity. It is under the subjugation. It is oppressed. It is depressed. It is struggling with its helplessness. While the free bird, that is the Americans, had so much of freedom that they kept on desiring new things. They had all the facilities, they had all the rights, everything was granted to them. And they kept on believing in their own progress, their development. They could think of the new things they would desire for themselves. But Africans, the natives of this land, were not even given the freedom to breathe, or the basic amenities also were not given to them. Now they are thinking of the trade winds. Now trade winds could also be that Americans were thinking of having the trade relations with other countries, or it would be the stray winds that blow all the time towards the equator and then to the west. You all might have read about the tidal winds in your geography. So you can even compare to those tidal winds, which are always favorable to the trading people, that they go in the direction in which the wind blows and they are able to help themselves in business and flourish. Soft though the sighing freeze, Now, the sound which is produced by the free bird is pretty loud. It is something which can be heard, and when it leaves the trees, it moves with a strong wind. Then just imagine a huge bird which is settling on the top of the tree. If it wants to fly, naturally it will give itself a push. That push also would be heard. The winds also will make a noise, and still it will fly and it will soar high in the sky. And you might have heard that proverb, early bird catches the worm. In the same way, we are being told that when this free bird flies, it is able to catch the fat worms which are waiting in the dawn in the bright lawn. That is, America was trying to colonize many new lands. They were finding out new lands, they were trying to colonize the natives, they were trying to establish their own enterprises over there. So those were the fat worms which were waiting in the dawn. Nobody will wait for others to come and subjugate them, but it is just a metaphorical language that Americans were finding out the new lands. They were trying to subjugate the new natives, and they were trying to expand their own enterprises, but were not prepared to give any freedom to the natives. Now the natives are the worms for them, which are waiting for them, and they will go and subjugate them, have their own colonies established over there. He names the sky his own. Now, just like the British Empire, they wanted to claim the whole world as their own. In the same way, the Americans also say that they want to claim the whole sky as their own. Earlier, it was saying that claim its own. Now, it has already named its own. And both lines have a hyperbole in them. What is the spelling of hyperbole? Hyperbole. That is exaggeration. Now you cannot claim the whole sky, you cannot own the sky, you cannot name the sky for yourself. But that is how the free birds sing. It is in a total contrast with the caged bird who is not even aware of what the freedom is, but still longs for it, yearns for it. But the free bird is thinking of the new desires it will fulfill. In the next stanza, we again have a reference to the caged bird. Now you just notice that we have one stanza of the free bird and then two stanzas of the caged birds. Earlier we had two stanzas and then one stanza of the free bird. Now after this free bird, the next two stanzas refer to the caged bird and not the free bird. But the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So he opens his throat to sing. Now the last two lines are again repeated, so we can claim it as repetition or refrain. It's better we call it repetition because refrain usually refers to one phrase of things. But here we have two lines which are repeated, so we call it repetition. Now the caged bird sings or stands, waits on the grave of its dream. That it is just dreaming of freedom. But maybe it will die, it will reach its grave and will not achieve that sort of a freedom. It won't come out of that captivity. It is a situation of total helplessness and still a desire to free, to change the situation. His shadow shouts on the nightmare scream. Now it also has a comparison to the slave's dream. The slave was also dreaming of freedom. He also was thinking of the times when he was a king, he wanted to be with his queen and all. It was his dream. Even if he screams in the dream, nobody will be able to hear him. Here also it is happening the same way. That the wings are clipped, the feet are tied. The bird is fluttering, struggling to free itself. Maybe it can see only the shadow which might go beyond the cage. The shadow might extend to the outside of the cage, but the screams, but the way the bird wants to free itself is not possible. So it is only in the nightmare, in the dreams, that the bird frees itself. It is the shadow which goes outside the cage, but the bird is not able to free itself. But when we talk of the nightmare scream, there we have an auditory imagery. Nightmare scream is the auditory imagery. And when we say stands on the grave of its dream, there we have a visual imagery. That is imagining that it might even die at that stage, but will not be able to free. So the first line, on the grave of the dreams, is a visual imagery. Nightmare scream is auditory imagery. And then this line you just see, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. Now the shadow is shouting. So the shadow has been personified. It is a personification. His wings are clipped, his feet are tied. So he opens his throat to sing. It cannot free its wings, it cannot free its feet, it cannot come out of the cage. So it is only the voice it raises high and lets it go out of the cage so that it could be heard and the freedom be sought. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. This whole stanza is a repetition of the earlier one. That the cage bird sings, it has experienced a sort of a freedom for the first time, so it is fearful. It is doubtful whether it will be able to attain any freedom or not. Freedom is something it has not experienced so far. It has not seen. It does not know what freedom would be, whether it will be a pleasant feeling or not, but still longs for it. Because the situation it is in is not something it is liking. It is longing for something which is beyond that confines of the prison. His tune is heard on the distant hill. It longs that its voice is heard by someone and something is done for its freedom. Some might hear it on a distant hill. The cage bird sings of freedom. It is still wanting that freedom to be given to it. And this last stanza also has an autobiographical element, because it was the time when Maya Angelou had started writing poetry. She was actually helping herself out of that traumatic situation when she had lost her voice and she was regaining it. She did not know what the speech could be for some 3 to 4 years. She was voiceless. She was in that traumatic situation. She could not tell anyone, she could not bear that pain, and it was only that her teacher was helping her out. And it was because of her teacher that she started writing and expressing her feelings that she came out with these poetries, and then later on she became a feminist. There are many speeches she has written later on, poetries she has done, and she was a bold person who could express herself. And later on, her ultimate poem, I would say, was Phenomenal Woman, which she wrote quite later in her life. And she married 3 times. She was a bold lady and she expressed herself freely. It was not that she was held back because of those experiences of her childhood, but she came out of it. She became a free bird herself, and she came out of the cage. She claimed that freedom. So this cage bird now sings of freedom. Because this poem was written later on, but it also tells of those time when she was struggling and she was wanting to come out of that trauma. Okay, now again it has the kinesthetic imagery, a sense meditated by the receptors, located in the muscles, tendons and joint, and stimulated by bodily movements and tensions. So here we are actually wanting that movement to be done by somebody, that somebody comes and frees her and she's able to come out of that situation.